Good morning, everybody. Now that we have quorum, I can welcome everybody to the meeting 6 of the Planning and Housing Committee. Welcome to the members of the committee, welcome to other guests, and welcome to everybody. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can also follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. And we acknowledge the land we are meeting on this is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the April 30th, 2019 meeting? Councillor Bradford, all those in favor? That carries. Okay, so let's run through the agenda. Item 6.1, official planned amendment policies to address the loss of dwelling rooms final recommendation report. We have deputations on that. Item 6.2, inclusionary zoning official plan policy directions. We have deputations on that. Item 6.3, expanding the housing allowance program. I'd like to inform that we're actually deferring this, and I'll put the motion forward, defer this to a month. We have a report coming on housing allowances in July, and we'd like to have the discussion as a whole. So if I can have the support to have this item deferred. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. So that will be deferred for the members that were here to make some deputations. We would like to have one full report on the discussions of the housing allowances, and that will happen at the meeting on July 3rd. Item 6.4, providing new affordable rental housing at 685 Queen Street East. Do I have deputations on that? No, we don't have deputations on that. So would I have a motion to move that? Councillor Fletcher, all those in favor?
Yes, I'm very, very happy to move that.
That carries.
It's a new co-op in the East End. Yay!
Fantastic news.
And thank Mr. Gadden very much for all of his great work in moving this forward.
Thank you. Item 6.5, home ownership funding allocations to support 127 new nonprofit affordable ownership homes. I do have 2 people registered to the Pute. I do understand that they don't wish to depute anymore, and if that's the case, if they can just nod, okay, so we can actually get the item moved. Councillor Fletcher moves the motion. All those in favor? And that carries. Item 6.6, strategy to minimize the negative impacts of residential infill construction, an update. So there's actually no speakers. Can I have a motion, Councillor?
Hold on.
There's.
You had a motion here to amend the item.
Okay, can we hold it down? 6.7, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw, 923 Oxford Street.
It's a timed item for 10:30.
Okay, so we have to hold it until 10:30. And area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 1589, the Queensway, same thing, item for 10:30. 6.9, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 494 Richmond Street East, also timed for 10:30, sorry. 6.10, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2075 Lawrence Avenue East, another item for 10:30. And 6.11, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2378 2410 Eglinton Avenue East, also an item timed for 10:30. And 6.12, area-specific amendment to the sign bylaw 2904 Shepherd Avenue East, timed for 10:30. So I would need a motion to add to do new business the letter that was circulated by Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Bradford, all those in favor? And that carries. And I think we can start with the agenda. Okay, so. Would you like to? Absolutely. So if we can have a motion.
We don't have time to post the item. Nobody's seen it yet.
Okay. So the clerk suggests that we actually, nobody has seen it, so we need to post it just in case. Okay, so the committee is good? All those in favor? That carries. Okay. Yeah. Motion carried. Okay, 6.1, official plan amendment, policies to address the loss of dwelling rooms, final recommendation report. Kagan Harris for speaking.
Hi there. Thank you all for allowing me to speak today to the Planning and Housing Committee on the important issue of dwelling units, or as we in the community so often refer to them, shared accommodations. Regardless if you refer to them as rooming houses, dwelling units, or shared accommodations, the fact remains preserving these units should undisputably be a major policy priority in supporting Toronto's most vulnerable residents during this city's housing crisis. I and many in the community commend the City Council for addressing the issue of disappearing dwelling units. I would describe the findings of this report and recommendation issued as a strong first step in developing a foundation to build a robust policy framework which will preserve the continued development of these units. These recommendations, however, should only be considered a first step, and when they establish a strong foundation for future policy, it is important we do not stop. In a crisis as all-consuming as the Toronto housing crisis, it must remain clear that efforts to preserve dwelling units is only a small, albeit critical step in the effort to support Toronto's most vulnerable residents as they attempt to navigate Toronto's affordable housing market. Currently, according to city bylaws, rooming houses are permitted within the boundaries of the former City of Toronto and Etobicoke. Within these permitted zones, rooming houses must meet strict regulation guidelines to receive a license. The reality is unlicensed rooming houses exist throughout the entirety of the City of Toronto, regardless of bylaws and city guidelines. Truthfully, these unlicensed rooming houses are the most reliably affordable options to residents in Toronto with low incomes. In far too many instances, these are the only options. As a result, residents who choose to live in these unlicensed accommodations are more susceptible to being taken advantage of by landlords and other tenants. Would you choose to report a housing issue if you knew it likely meant the closure of your home? Tenants who call these rooming houses home must make the impossible choice between living in substandard accommodations due to unresolved safety violations and financial abuse by their landlords or living on the streets. This is an unfair choice many residents in Toronto must make every day due to rules and bylaws which insist rooming houses outside of the former City of Toronto and Etobicoke are unlicensed and thus illegal. Allowing rooming houses to exist throughout the city, as well as reducing the rules and regulations for licensing these accommodations, will provide needed oversight and protection for Toronto's most vulnerable residents who have no choice but to accept these shared accommodations as their home. I'm here today to advocate to the Planning and Housing Committee to consider reviewing the city bylaws in regards to the legality of rooming houses throughout the City of Toronto with the aim of allowing shared accommodations to exist throughout the entirety of the city. These rooming houses will continue to exist in Toronto, regardless if City Council wishes to take these steps. As a result, not addressing this issue reinforces the vicious cycle of homelessness many rooming houses tenants are trapped in, as they are easily shut down due to code violations and the transient nature of operators of such units. If the city truly believes in a housing-first model, then we must ensure everyone has access to housing, regardless of socioeconomic status. We must ensure that every resource and tool is available to increase the stock of affordable housing in the city. Let's do that by taking the next step. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for joining us here today. Appreciate it. Next, Deputant Melissa Goldston. Good morning, Melissa. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Okay.
On behalf of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust and the Dwelling Room Preservation Policy Working Group, I wanted to thank everyone here today for all of your work on this official plan amendment. Our affordable housing crisis is a complex issue, and it really requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. And I wanted to thank everyone here and all of the people in the room today who have been working on this policy and who've been working very incredibly hard, to address this issue. This includes the many people in the Preservation Policy Working Group who are behind me, who are going to be presenting on other issues today at this meeting. I'd like to begin by emphasizing that we're happy that this official plan amendment will be moving forward to a council vote shortly. While we're interested in getting the best policy we can get, we also recognize that the sooner it's approved and implemented, the better. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get the comprehensive framework of policies and programs in place that's necessary to effectively prevent dwelling room loss and ensure tenants at risk of displacement are adequately supported, and we look forward to moving into the next phase of that process. We've seen some significant improvements made to this policy since it was first proposed last year, and in particular, we wanted to endorse the threshold of 6 dwelling rooms, which will ensure most dwelling rooms are protected. The requirement that the lost dwelling rooms be replaced with the same gross floor area maintained as either dwelling rooms or bachelor units, and the proposed rent levels for replacement units where there are no returning tenants. We think that together these two provisions will result in one-to-one replacement of dwelling rooms and will therefore help to preserve the existing supply of low-end market housing, and will also ensure displaced tenants have the opportunity to return to units in the new building if they choose. However, there's still significant issues with this policy. First, we do not support a 15-year affordability period for replacement units. OPA 406, which is the TO Core downtown official plan, includes a very similar dwelling room replacement policy to what's being proposed here. For a period of at least 20 years, the rents for replacement housing will be similar to those in effect at the time the development application is made. It's unclear why this policy should have a shorter affordability period than OPA 406, which is approved and implemented. Allowing landlords to raise rents to whatever they like after 15 years means that the most this policy will ever achieve is a 15-year delay in the permanent loss of deeply affordable housing. Allowing landlords to raise rents to whatever they like after 15 years once a tenant has vacated the replacement unit incentivizes landlords to find ways to evict tenants after the 15 years is up. We think that changing the affordability period so that it's consistent with TO Core is something that can and should be done today in this meeting. Second, we don't support the exemption of buildings where the rent for all dwelling rooms in the building are above dwelling room Tier 2 mid-range rents. Today, the top end of dwelling room Tier 2 mid-range rents is $1,306 a month, which is high, but not that much higher than the current asking rent of dwelling rooms in hot rental markets like Parkdale. This means that it wouldn't be terribly difficult for a landlord in Parkdale to avoid being subject to the new requirements of the OPA by pushing current tenants out, fixing the place up a bit, and finding new tenants who will pay more than that $1,306 a month, which is the kind of thing that's already happening across the city. Service providers are seeing an onslaught of first-time users of the shelter system. People who've always been housed and are only homeless today because the city no longer has any rental housing that they can afford. And predatory evictions and the declining supply of low-end of market housing are to blame for this. We think this exemption will create conditions that will make the situation worse. It'll expedite the loss of affordable rental housing through upscaling, increase the harassment and manipulation of already vulnerable tenants, and cause vulnerable tenants to be forced out of their homes and into homelessness. We also think this will result in not just high-end and specialized dwelling rooms being exempted, but will effectively exempt a much larger segment of dwelling rooms, especially those in hot rental markets like Parkdale, where risk of upscaling to above dwelling room Tier 2 mid-range rent levels is already high. All that being said, we don't think that changing the exemption is a simple change that can be made in this meeting, and we don't want the OPA sent back to staff, so this is what we want instead. We want the impacts of this policy to be tracked and the policy to be regularly reviewed, evaluated, and reported on, along with the existing rental replacement policy for rental units. And we would like staff to investigate how to collaborate across divisions to enable better data collection and monitoring. So, for example, a regular audit of rooming houses is needed to monitor the supply of low-end of market housing and evaluate the impact of the policy on it. We need to revisit rooming house licensing requirements and start requiring landlords to provide rent rolls and tenant information annually so that we can track unusual rent increases and high rates of tenant turnover and evictions, prevent landlords from attempting to skirt OPA requirements, and it would also enable city staff to implement this policy effectively. We need to track how many units are being replaced, in what form, at what rent, and what affordability period. We need to track what happens with tenants displaced from lost units. Are they returning to new units in the building? How many are returning? How many aren't returning, and why? And there are some cross-divisional processes that need to be set up to ensure this policy is effective. A system to ensure that replacement units are being filled with the right people through a transparent process where there aren't returning tenants for the units. Better enforcement of the contracts made with property owners to ensure that they meet their obligations. And a better process for tenant relocation and assistance. And last but not least, we need a better proactive tenant support system to protect tenants and prevent predatory eviction. And we need planning staff to be connected to and working with that system to ensure that affected tenants are provided legal support and education, and tenants in units with expiring affordability periods don't fall victim to predatory landlords. Thank you.
Councillor Perks?
Thank you, Melissa. So the main piece I heard in your asks is that we make sure we establish some kind of overall system for watching how the rental replacement works, not just for dwelling rooms, but for all of them.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
And also the 20-year affordability period.
And I heard you about the affordability period. We've had that conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
Melissa, I'm not sure that that you have seen this, but this morning we established a protection of affordable rental housing committee here at this
didn't.
committee, with the subcommittee, to deal with many of these things, particularly renovictions, protecting tenants from N12s, N13s, and casual evictions in order to maintain the housing supply. So I'm assuming you'll be in full support of that.
Yes, definitely. I'm very excited that we're moving in that direction.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Next, Deputy Jeff Mall. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
Last name is Milne.
Milne, sorry.
That's okay. Excuse me. Distinguished members of the Planning and Housing Committee. My name is Jeffrey Milne, and I'm the owner of 935 Queen Street West in Toronto, Parkview Arms Hotel, also a licensed rooming house in good standing. I sit before you today to briefly object to the proposed citywide official plan amendment number 453 and to express our objection. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. We have owned this property for over 5 decades, going on to almost 55 years, very close. We understand fully that the policies proposed under OPA 453 would impose significant new obligations and restrictions on us as owners and operators of the Parkview Arms Hotel. We feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the proposed changes and are concerned, gravely concerned, with the impact that these changes could have on our business and our family. We believe we believe the dwelling room replacement requirements under OPA 453 would make investment in the hotel through redevelopment near impossible and would also make it much too expensive to carry out repairs and improvements. Further, the overly restrictive rent protection policies would have a vast negative impact on the financial health of our business. We see no reason, none whatsoever, why the city should be able and allowed to control and restrict our business in these ways. For these reasons, we object to OPA 453 as I've spoken. That's all I do have to say. I would just in closing like to say, we as the Parkview Arms Hotel, when it was originally purchased, it was a hotel, and then it did change to a rooming house about 30 years ago, but we operate as a hotel. And we feel we do not fall under this stigmatism, I guess, that rooming, when people hear rooming houses, and right away they think of the incapacitated and the needy and the social assistance and the ODSP, et cetera, et cetera. That is not our operation. That has not been our operation for the last minimum 25 years. Our residents are all working, and they are do not need any special care whatsoever. And I just wanted to bring that forward to the Planning and City Housing. We don't, in general, don't oppose what you're putting forward, but to us specifically, it's just an impossible task for us. And that's all I have to say. And thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you, Jeff, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we have one more deputant, Ana Teresa Portillo. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this time. My name is Ana Teresa Portillo. I'm a rooming house dwelling room tenant advocate. I prepared some comments here. Okay. The dire situation of the people I work with has not been caused by the demolition and redevelopment of their homes. Rooming house and dwelling room tenants are being threatened by a slow and accumulative process, a process by private actors to de-tenant and reposition their Toronto housing stock. These buildings have become spaces of increased internal segregation, where the tools available to private actors, like refusal to conduct repairs, above-line rent increases, intimidation, buyouts, racism, sexism, and systemic poverty, these tools are used to organize who is displaced and who is welcomed. One unit is well-maintained and serviced, while their neighbor's unit is falling apart at the seams. Deferred renovations, combined with vacancy decontrol, incentivizes and weaponizes private profit-driven managers and owners. And the result is not the increase in demolition and redevelopment of these properties, but instead buildings with internal systems of segregation that align with larger systems of discrimination. While any protective measure is welcomed, and we thank you for that, tenants want to see the end of vacancy decontrol and strict penalties for any landlord practicing deferred renovations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you. And anybody else interested in speaking on this item? Seeing none, questions of staff? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair to planning, how did we land on the 15-year affordability period instead of what the deputants were suggesting, 20 years or more?
Through the chair, we landed on 15 years because for recent developments, that's been the city's practice to secure 15 years where incentives or city funding isn't provided, where there's new affordable housing.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
So where there is new affordable housing, we've secured 15 years where city incentives or funding isn't provided. So this is emulating that practice.
What would be the impact of that being longer, 20 years or 25 years or?
We had looked at that and we heard through the feedback through the consultations that it was a balancing act, that the longer affordability period would make it difficult for these measures to be met by developers.
And can you explain the piece about opportunities to be sought to secure the ongoing affordability for a period of at least 49 years? What are those opportunities?
So those opportunities can vary. We had originally looked at if Section 37 is available to us, that could be used to secure longer affordability. We could also use any incentives or programs that are available, such as the Open Door program or other similar programs.
How long will it be until development applications would actually need to comply with these policies?
Through the chair, when the policies come into effect. Just to elaborate on that, there would be an appeal period to the amendment, and following, if there's no appeal, it'll come into effect shortly after adoption. If there's an appeal, it goes off to the LPAT. I'm not in a position to guess when that will occur.
All right. And then just lastly, with these changes that we're bringing forward, my colleagues here, I think we're often working with community groups where there's not necessarily a lot of information, or the information is not disseminated so that tenants understand the rights associated with this. Do we have a plan, or will there be resources available for tenants affected by these changes to make sure that they understand their rights and access to supports?
Through the chair, when we receive applications, we do spend time with tenants to provide information, and we very often will partner with other groups such as FMTA to ensure that tenants have information and understand what their rights are through the process.
Great. Thanks very much.
Councillor Perks?
First, I want to begin, so Councillor Fillion has asked me to move an amendment to add in Policy 11 the words, "in areas where dwelling rooms such as those in rooming houses are permitted." I've run this language past you. Can you give me a sense of what the effect of doing that would be?
Quite simply, the effect of the proposed amendment to the policy would be to, the policy would only apply where permissions are currently in place for dwelling rooms. And in the zoning bylaw, right?
In the zoning bylaw. But the dwelling room would be protected. It's just that you wouldn't, so if there's a dwelling room in an area where that use is not permitted, what's the effect of doing this?
It's not protected.
There would still be, if an application came forward, the policy obligation for tenant assistance for tenants that may be affected by change.
Right, so it still protects those tenants. It just cleans up the language so that it matches our zoning bylaw.
That's correct.
Right, okay. Second, we've heard deputation about extending the length of time. When the length of time for the rental replacement runs out and there's a current tenant there, is their rent still protected as rents for all tenants are protected as long as their tenure is continued under the landlord tribunal rules?
Through the chair, yes, their rents would be protected as long as they came in the initial affordability period until they left.
So as long as they continue their tenure, they still have the same rental protection?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Councillor Parks. I was coming. Crawford.
We were all at a meeting late last night. Yeah. So this has been a long journey for me. I've been trying to get to a place where tenants who live in dwelling rooms have the same kind of legal protections as tenants who live in full apartments, pretty much since the day I got elected first, almost 13 years ago. And it's been difficult, and there's been a lot of resistance from some parts of the city and some members of council. But I think here we finally landed on a way where we can say, you know what, if you're a Torontonian, you get the same coverage, and it doesn't matter what kind of unit you live in. So I think this is a great step forward. And I really want to commend the work of both those community activists who have been joining me in getting this through for years now, and also city staff who found an elegant way of saying to Torontonians, it really doesn't matter whether there's both a bathroom and a kitchen in your unit or not, you have the legal protections that the City of Toronto affords you. I wanted to speak for a moment about the language in Councillor Fillion, the motion that I'm moving on behalf of Councillor Fillion here. We, as one of the deputants mentioned, we have two kinds of areas in Toronto. We have areas where rooming houses are legal and areas where rooming houses are not legal. And what Councillor Fillion's motion does is say, in areas where rooming houses are legal, the policy applies. In areas where rooming houses are not legal, the policy applies. So it's just correcting some language to make sure that will be the case. We still have, and I'm speaking to all the activists in the room, we still have a task to make sure that rooming houses become legal citywide. We're not able to fix that here on this policy, but in November, we're going to get a new housing plan. And in that new housing plan, if we do our job well as a community, including rooming houses as a permitted use throughout the city must be part of that policy. You all wrote down that you're going to be busy on that between now and November. Mr. Gadden's staring at me because he knows he's going to get a lot of emails and phone calls in the next while. We have a long path to go before we get to a sensible housing system in the City of Toronto that serves the needs of the people who live here, not just the people who invest in real estate here. But today we take an important step forward, and I want to congratulate again everyone in the community who's worked so hard so that the most vulnerable of us have the same kind of housing security of tenure as the rest of us do. So thank you to all of you for your work on this.
I'm just going to speak for a second.
Okay, we got the clapping out of the way, and
Not quite out of the way. I don't have a lot to say. I just wanted to acknowledge the work of Councillor Perks. He did say he started this when he was first elected a couple of terms ago, and he's not given up. He's been relentless in moving this forward, and I don't think that everything that we do here with our partners requires a champion at City Hall, and Gord, you are that champion, so thank you very much.
Just be very brief. I'd like to echo that sentiment and pass along thanks and gratitude and congratulations to Councillor Perks for bringing this forward. It's been a lot of work, and to the staff team behind it who've really accelerated this so we can get to where we are today. And of course, all of the activist community and residents and people who participated in the consultation process. I think we've got a much better outcome because of those robust consultations and the feedback and the input that you've provided us with. And I want to underscore how important it is that we look at every tool available to address the housing crisis and challenges here in the City of Toronto. On our planning and housing agenda today alone, we're looking at multiple tools to do that, preserving and maintaining our existing stock through this report in front of us, expanding affordable housing stock through inclusionary zoning, which is coming up, super important, and then layering on program supports. We'll be coming back to that in July, but the MLTT piece and housing allowances. It's all really important stuff, and all of them need to come together to really provide more affordable housing options across the continuum here in Toronto. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this implemented and being able to tell residents back in Ward 19 and across the city that there are supports available for them. We have put the protections in place, and that no matter where you're living, you can count on those protections to maintain the affordability where you are, and that's hugely important. So thank you very much.
thank you, Councillor Bradford. I'm just going to say a few words. Also thank Councillor Perks. As everybody mentioned here, he has been working on this for a long time, and so we all appreciate the efforts. I want to thank the community because I know that Councillor Perks has been working closely with many of you. But I also want to echo what Councillor said about making sure that we actually are able to have rooming houses across the city. Rooming houses across the city and actually having a license system that works properly. I was just asking our deputy city manager if she knew how many licensed rooming houses we had nowadays, and she said, I believe it's probably just over 200. And we know licensed. And so we need to make sure that we know that there's hundreds and hundreds more throughout the city, and we need to make sure that we have a system that captures this better in order to properly protect the tenants and now protect the units as well. So not only do we have to make sure that we have it across the city, but we actually work with a system that catches these rooming houses so we can do the job that we need to do, which actually protect the tenants and protect the stock. So thank you to everybody involved, and looking forward to continuing this work. Okay. Should we? Okay. Recorded vote, Councilor Burke? Okay.
All those in favor of the item before you, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bailao. Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Do we have a confetti cannon?
Thank you so much. And now we're moving on to item 6.2, inclusionary zoning official plan policy directions.
So we start computations on this, and then we stop at 10:30 for time edits.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Perks. Can I have, I thought it was moved as a package, but it wasn't, so the clerks would like to have a vote on the item as amended.
Item is amended? Okay.
So we voted on the? Yep. Yep, absolutely.
The item as amended, all those in favor, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bailao. Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, and now on to 6.2, inclusionary zoning official plan policy directions. Alejandra Ruiz Vargas, first speaker. Good morning, Alejandra. Okay, good morning.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And as you know, or I don't know if you know, but Acorn IC, inclusionary zoning, is really dear to our heart. We have been working since 2005, and I want to mention that we have here Peter Milton, that it was the Ministry of Housing that, at that time, that helped us to really pass all what we want in Ontario about inclusionary zoning. So it's very nice to see people that really what it says, they care, and he's here. Thank you so much. So Acorn is the largest tenant union in Toronto, 40,000 members across the city, made up of low income and moderate income, and we fight for social change. As we know, we are in the middle of the housing crisis. There are people who don't like this term, but we are. We are in a housing crisis, and we have been for a while. 40% of renters pay more than 30% of their income on housing on the city, and only 2% of the amount of housing built or approved in the last 5 years was affordable. This is a shame. This is why Acorn has been fighting for inclusionary zoning for over a decade. We were excited when we, along with our many allies, won our campaign for inclusionary zoning in 2018 and got the province to pass enable legislation. But on Tuesdays, when the city's report came out, we were very disappointed. It looks like the developers had managed to convince the city to basically require no affordable housing in this policy. Developers are claiming no one will build in Toronto if they are required to provide affordable housing for low and moderate income people. Well, really, this is ridiculous, because what is the difference between the people of New York or Los Angeles compared to with us? Same thing, and they have been very successful. And the other thing, we cannot lie to ourselves, because Toronto is the hottest housing market in the country. So we are the golden egg. They're not going to, the developers are not going to suffer in the giving some set aside of units to low income and moderate income. The city proposed the affordable units will get from IC that we fought so hard for it, are only kept affordable for 25 years. I don't think so. Nobody in this room, and I say nobody in this room would like to see your sons, your daughters, grandchildren in the same position in 25 years again. So 25 years is too low. The city also proposed as little as 2.5%. Well, 5% is like giving, bring a child to a candy store and only allow them to take one candy. Really, we should not even speaking about it right now. 5% is a no-no. So even worse, the IC policies will not apply to most of the city. Scarborough, Etobicoke, Weston, North York. Are you trying to tell us, the low income and moderate income, that we are second class citizens? Because this is the message that we are receiving. How come IC is not going to be across the city? And so we think that the city needs to do more. Inclusionary zoning must be stronger. ACORN is releasing a report today looking at the best inclusionary zoning practices across all North America. We look at many cities. Most cities require units kept affordable forever. And most cities require 20% of all the new developments be set aside as affordable. And most cities are knowing the level of crisis that Torontonians are feeling. So we demand that the affordability period for new units delivered by IC must be forever, and a minimum of 20 to 30% of the entire development be set aside as affordable, not just the additional density. Inclusionary zoning policies apply to all areas of the city, not only and this is why we think that it's very important. The city of Toronto, or Torontonians, has been feeling lately without no hope. And a strong inclusionary zoning will give hope and will stop the gentrification that is really eating alive the city. So I know this is the beginning of a conversation, and this is not really set writing in stone, but we need to set a bar higher than we are saying right now. So because really and truly, we're very difficult to live with this rent so high and without no hope in the way. So we will not stop fighting until this program is an example for all North America and what Toronto is capable and what it says it's in height. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ebony Menzies?
Oh, sorry, you don't have questions?
Hello.
Good morning, Ebony.
Good morning. Thank you. With me is my daughter, Faith. My name is Ebony Menzies, a Weston ACORN member, single mother, and leader. ACORN is the largest grassroots membership organization of low and moderate income people in the city, the province, and the country of Canada. We are here to speak about inclusionary zoning, something ACORN has been fighting for and pushing for since 2008. Today sets the tone for the conversation the city will have about inclusionary zoning through public consultations, neighborhood meetings, news stories, and votes at City Hall. The city report starts this conversation off on the wrong foot, we feel, with the bar set way too low and the expectations of what we can achieve being almost nothing. We worry that developers and lobbyists have made this report far too cautious. The housing crisis, the housing emergency, we should say, will not be solved through caution, so we must be bold. Here's why we are worried. The city report sets an affordability period of only 25 years. In 25 years, we're going to end up right back where we started or in an even worse situation. The city report only applies inclusionary zoning to additional density, and it's only for developments with 100 units or more. The city report excludes large parts of the city from inclusionary zoning, places where low-income people live, like Scarborough, Weston, where my chapter is based, Etobicoke, and North York. With all these constraints and limits, the city report suggests a set-aside rate of affordable units of 2.5% up to 20%. Can anyone guess which number the developers will lobby for? We've already released a report today. We shared it with you just now. It looks at the best practices across North America, and Acorn is calling for inclusionary zoning to be a right. We need the whole development to have a percentage set aside as affordable units for low and moderate income people, and it should apply to developments with lower than 100 units. Acorn is calling for the affordability period to be in perpetuity, or in layman's terms, forever. For my children, my grandchildren, for I won't be here in 25 years to make sure that these things are implemented. And because the housing crisis is so big, there is a need for 20 to 30% of units to be set aside as affordable. Things are bad out there. Currently, I cannot afford rent anymore, and my mother-in-law has to help me pay half of my rent just to keep a roof over my children's heads. We need to start this conversation off on the right foot. We need low and moderate income people to feel like it's worth participating in the conversation. Acorn members heard the numbers being proposed and our hearts broke. We're here today to tell you what we need in order to join in this conversation and in order to make inclusionary zoning worthy of the 10-year battle we fought to get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we,
Any questions?
I thought we were done with the clapping. As you know, we're not allowed to clap in here. Can I have Peter Milchant? Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Chair, councillors. Well, forgive me if I'm nervous. I'm not used to deputing at committee. No, I'm very happy being a civilian now. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be here to speak in response to the staff report dated May 13th. I want to applaud staff for a very thoughtful and purposeful approach to the work that they've done. The assessment report is the critical starting point for the discussion about an inclusionary zoning policy in the city. It allows council to make evidence-based policy decisions. The inclusionary zoning can be an extraordinarily effective tool to develop and create more affordable housing in the city, but it is dependent upon creating more housing. Merely carving up the existing housing pie and reallocating it is not going to create more affordable housing. This is predicated on density bonusing. You actually have to increase the supply of housing, and that way you can set aside a portion of the housing to be affordable. And City Council has to embrace in all of its communities the notion that there will have to be more density to achieve these goals. We also have to acknowledge that this is going to be a partnership between the private and public sectors and treat it as such. So I want to make some comments on the specific areas covered in the report. The areas for inclusionary zoning. The assessment report has identified where inclusionary zoning might actually be viable and sustainable. And that's consistent with the work that had been done previously at the Ministry of Housing in terms of trying to understand housing pricing and the housing market and what might be achievable. So I have a great deal of confidence in the data that the city staff have developed. I also want to point out that Bill 108, if it's adopted, is going to limit where inclusionary zoning could be done. And I'm not here to debate the merits or certainly the demerits of Bill 108, but at least you can tell that the assessment report and the data city staff have now would actually be fairly consistent with what appears to be the direction the government is going in Bill 108. So other Ontario municipalities might be precluded from developing inclusionary zoning. City of Toronto, depending on how Bill 108 shakes out, I think would still be in a position to build inclusionary zoning where it can and should be built. Residual land value is something that the price of land lowers as inclusionary zoning requirements get put into place. That there is empirical evidence that that will be the case. But it doesn't happen overnight. So how you transition into the inclusionary zoning regime is something the council will have to be mindful of. The set-aside rates, I know there's a great deal of disappointment about what they are, but they're based on the evidence, and they're consistent with what I was aware would likely be viable in the city in an initial launch of an inclusionary zoning regime. Over time, those set-aside numbers, as the market changes, as residual land values adapt, those set-aside numbers can increase. I share some of the deputant's concerns about the affordability levels and the duration. And what your assessment report demonstrates is what kind of affordability level and duration you can get when there is no subsidy or public support for inclusionary zoning. I'll get to that in a moment. So measures and incentives. I do believe the IZ should be applied to density bonuses. That's problematic within our planning regime because you never know what base zoning is in the City of Toronto or in the province of Ontario, unlike in many U.S. jurisdictions. So I do think there has to be some form of additional support or subsidy. Waiving or deferring DCs, certainly reducing parking requirements, not having alternative parkland dedication rates for the IZ units. But I want to point out that in the U.S., it might be true that the municipalities don't give direct subsidies. But what the staff report glosses over is in the U.S., federal, state governments provide significant incentives, tax incentives, grants, and subsidies to make affordable housing work and inclusionary zoning work. And in fact, many municipalities provide indirect grants and subsidies to make IZ work. And if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to answer it. In summary, I just want to say I think you're on the right track. This is going well. But I encourage you in your deliberations to be focused on making evidence-based decisions, not just aspirational decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions of the deputant? Councillor Perks?
So I know you don't want to talk about Bill 108.
Pardon?
I know you don't want to talk about Bill 108. Nevertheless, so you talked about providing incentives through, say, development charges or whatever. Doesn't the new Bill 108 bundling of the parkland dedication and Section 37 and the soft cost DCs take that ability away from us?
So my advice, and staff would certainly be in a position to assess this and give you their best advice, is that those various charges should not apply to the units created through inclusionary zoning. I'm not suggesting waiving DCs on whole developments, but just to create some additional affordability of these new units. Bill 108 is going to upend how the city collects development charges and parkland monies, how it is able to utilize Section 37. The legislation isn't clear on how that's going to work. I don't know if it's going to be done through regulation, whether there's going to be amendments tabled to Bill 108 that'll clarify that. But it is going to constrain the City of Toronto and every municipality in Ontario in collecting fees. My advice, though, is for the IZ units themselves, do your very best to eliminate as much added municipal cost to those units. In doing so, you might be able to extend the duration and the affordability of those particular units.
So use it that way rather than for the base.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Why should the regular condo in the building not pay the DCs that it has to pay? The inclusionary unit, though, I think should pay no or reduced DCs.
But I wanted to make sure I understood something. You're saying, so use incentives to extend the affordability beyond what the study says here?
Yes, that's why you're getting
I
such
see.
modest duration and affordability.
Okay.
Because staff have built it around a model of no public
But just what the market
investment
would
or
deliver
subsidy.
without incentive. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Next speaker, Victor Willis.
Good morning.
Good morning, Victor.
Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to talk to you. I actually had a written submission that I sent in past 5 p.m. You will get it, but it's not in your package. And I'm also going to, so I'm going to allow that to enter into the package of things. I'm going to refer to it briefly, but I realize that I have 2 hats that I want to speak from. One is as the executive director of the Parkdale Activity Recreation Center, so I've been in that position for 20 years. And I've watched the erosion of affordable housing that was held in the private sector over that time. And with that erosion, I've watched many people in Parkdale either pay exorbitant amounts of money for their very meager rooms or units. And I've also seen people lose their housing, end up on the street, and in fact perish because of it. So I really want to applaud City Council and this committee and the staff for acknowledging that inclusionary zoning is a very important and appropriate tool. So that's the context of me as somebody who works in Parkdale. And then there's the context of me, so that's Ward 4 now. And I also live in Ward 12. So at St. Clair and Bathurst, I've watched 2 developments go up, one on the northwest corner and one on the southeast corner, and another one proposed for the northeast corner. I imagine that there are hundreds and hundreds of units that are going to be developed in that, and I'm still wondering when we're going to have some benefit for the people who are being pushed out from the market pressures that are existing, and that inclusionary zoning, I think, is actually one of the better tools to help us along a spectrum of responses that I hope that this committee will be looking at over its tenure. So I think there are 3 areas that we need to look at that are very important, and they've been raised already, and I think that some of the subsequent speakers will also be raising them. The first one is, the previous speaker talked about, what we talk about is medium and high value zones. And I certainly understand that with Bill 108, depending on how it ends up, will have some impact on where inclusionary zoning may be possible to apply. I do think it's important for the City of Toronto to actually understand that it's the 4th largest jurisdiction in North America, that in fact it has the ability and it has the responsibility to steward what you're in charge of, and you're in charge of land planning and land use. And what I hope that that stewardship would understand is, yes, the provincial government may have some designs on how inclusionary zoning is to be applied through Bill 108, but this council, this committee and this council has the opportunity to say that inclusionary zoning is something that should really be applied to every square foot of the City of Toronto. The second part, and I know that there are subsequent speakers, and in the packages there are some very good arguments about how those numbers will work, so I encourage you to look at them. The second issue, of course, is the idea of affordability, and you've heard it. I'm glad that previous speakers have already talked about this, but I really want to sort of focus on the idea that if you're going to create a benefit, and that benefit is supposed to remain, then you really need to make that benefit remain. I think that we've spent a lot of time in the city watching benefits have a time limit or a best before date, and then they disappear. And we now see the housing crisis that we're in because we haven't really retained the things that City Council and that Torontonians think are important. So if you're going to create a benefit, make sure that it stays, and therefore that means it's forever. Then we get into the nuance of, if you're going to do that, should you be focusing on lower cost condo units, or should you be focusing on creating opportunities for rental housing? So you create a low cost housing unit, condo unit, and the first person that buys it benefits from purchasing it. And once they sell it, that benefit disappears. And so I think that there's a really good argument to say that as you're going to create opportunity for a benefit that remains, focus on rental housing as the part of the formula that you're considering in your deliberation on this issue. I think the final piece is about density, and I think density is a very important topic. It's a tough one, but if density, and we've watched the OMB create density increases, I think that we have to understand that if we're going to provide density, it's a benefit, and that benefit must come to Torontonians, and it must come to the Torontonians who are currently unable to afford rents and to live in the city well. So I just want to encourage you to please take those comments into consideration. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Victor. Any questions of the deputant?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Bree Gardner. And following Bree, it will be Joy Connolly. Good morning.
Good morning. And thank you for allowing me the time to speak today. My name is Bree Gardner. I am 18 years old, and I'm here as a leader of the Lakeshore Affordable Housing Advocacy and Action Group. We are a resident-led community initiative supported by a number of not-for-profit organizations seeking to organize around the affordable housing crisis in South Etobicoke. So I come to you today because housing affordability is indeed a crisis. And inclusionary zoning, however, is a tool that we can use to actively address the lack of affordable housing on an ongoing basis. It's been used successfully in a number of American and international jurisdictions, and it certainly shows promise right here at home, but this policy does not do it justice. Right now, the proposed policy talks about inclusionary zoning on developments over 100 units in strong market areas such as downtown, and developments over 140 units everywhere else. And in the map that you have, strong market areas essentially refers to the center of the city. This is misguided. We need affordable housing across the city and not just in the center of the city. Prioritizing this area does not it basically ignores the need of many of the city's neighborhood improvement areas and other communities that are in desperate need of affordable housing. It does not make a lot of sense in the context of the poverty reduction strategy, and it's not what we need right now. I cannot advocate in good faith for the residents of my community by supporting affordable housing from a downtown first perspective. The other troubling part of this policy is that it only asks for 2.5 to 5% of rental housing to be affordable and for 10% of condos for sale to be affordable. This is not nearly enough. 5% of rental housing to be affordable will help a very, very small portion of our community members who are precariously housed to access stable housing. Making condos easier to buy, while that will be good for first-time home buyers perhaps, it will not help anyone who's feeling the brunt of the housing crisis right here and now. We need to shift the focus away from home ownership as the goal and to allowing people to access safe, sustainable rental housing, because that is what people need right now. If the people feeling the brunt of the housing crisis right now had the money to put down on a home, even below the market rent, they would not be precariously housed if they had that ability. Toronto deserves better than a half measure. The people in this city who are on the streets, who have no fixed address, who are living in shelters, who are even raising their children in shelters, all of these people deserve better than what this policy will give them. And I understand that we are in a tricky situation with the province right now, and the province is perhaps looking to restrict inclusionary zoning, but we can't go about this as though we've already lost. Certainly yesterday's announcement of the restoration of provincial funding to the city gives us that. You don't go into a negotiation with a compromise. This is not progressive, it is not innovative, it is a compromise. And it is a compromise that will quite literally cost lives. Housing in this city is an emergency that cannot be overstated. And this policy may have been able to address the problem before I was born, perhaps, but it wouldn't even have been able to address the problem 5 years ago. And certainly in 2019, this is far too little, far too late. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant?
Yes.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes. I noticed in the report that it indicates there's what we're just calling an area of moderate growth that could sustain inclusionary zoning in the Lakeshore area, but are you saying that you believe there's that much development in Etobicoke Lakeshore that we should be approaching that a little bit differently?
So I don't know if you've ever taken a drive around the Park Lawn and Lakeshore area.
Yes, many times.
But I'm sure you can see just in that area, there is so much, like, there have been condos going up nonstop for the last several years, and it isn't stopping. We are continuing to see this development everywhere, and it's spreading to our other neighborhoods, to along the lakeshore to Long Branch. It's going north. It's not being built in areas that can handle the densification, and it is pushing people out. It is raising the property values everywhere else. It is causing landlords to evict their tenants.
Yes.
And so, to answer your question, yes, I do.
And do you ever appear at Etobicoke York Community Council or work trying to get affordable units in those developments that are already going up?
I have not. For background, our organization is relatively young. It's only been around for about a year, so we are starting to walk, and this is sort of our first steps into the world of deputations. But that is something we have looked at, but we have not yet.
You've not done that yet?
No.
But is that in your plan then?
Well, I can't speak for what the organization is going to like definitively that we are going to do that, but is something we are looking at, yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, Joy Connolly, and after that, Richard Dreadlock. John? Oh, okay, yep. Okay, good morning, Sean.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. I brought with me, and I'll give them to the clerk, a study recently completed by Steve Pomeroy at Carleton University Center for Urban Issues as part of my deputation. I'll just pass it along to the clerks. Evidence-based decision-making, I think, is a critical part of the work that we're doing right now. Good policy is based on that evidence. There are, in a discussion like this especially, a lot of voices on all sides that are loud and forceful and passionate, and that's part of the public policy process. And your part is to find in all of that what works in the real world. A part of that is a recognition of the importance of the industry. If growth is going to pay for growth, we recognize, I think most people recognize, that IZ depends on policies that don't prevent that growth from happening. It also means recognizing the details in the data. Today, Acorn released a study that showed that cities like New York City and Vancouver and San Francisco and Chicago and Boulder, Colorado have learned lessons about how to apply inclusionary zoning that we can learn from. And when we look at that research, we can see that perpetual affordability, deeper affordability, broader application across the jurisdiction are all things that those jurisdictions learned to do. And in fact, many of them started without those policies and moved to them over time as they learned more about inclusionary zoning. So we can learn from those examples and from those parallels. But examples and parallels aren't everything, and local economics matter a lot. We aren't New York or Boulder, and what actually works in Toronto is very much an empirical question about the details. That's why Steve Pomeroy at Carleton University developed the research with the support of the Maitrey Foundation that I'm sharing with you today. It's built on the good work done by Mark Conway and Barry Lyons Consulting, which was commissioned by the city to look at key aspects of the market data. But it not only builds on, but goes beyond that research and looks more at the details and a more granular approach at the market factors. And what we find when we look at that detailed analysis of the economics in the market is that the city can actually gain more from inclusionary zoning if we look at the details than is currently proposed in the policy direction. What we see as the NBLC research shows is that the city certainly can hit 10 and 20% set-aside rates at 100% of average market rent. But if we look more granularly, we know that we can do better in several ways. First, we know from the research that Steve Pomeroy did that perpetual affordability is absolutely achievable. In fact, both studies show that perpetual affordability is achievable. That set-aside rates in high-value areas can actually go higher than 20%, and both studies show that. And Steve's research shows that, in fact, in the high-value areas, we can get as high as 30 or 32%. Affordability levels of 100% of AMR are achievable, but if we look closer, we can see we could also hit 80 and even 60% of AMR if we're prepared to adjust set-aside rates to provide for that deeper affordability. And according to this more recent study, inclusionary zoning is also achievable, albeit at fairly low set-aside rates, in even the low-cost markets in Toronto, and achievable on as-of-right development, again at lower set-aside rates, all across Toronto. We can have achievable inclusionary zoning in every part of the city. The city's proposed policy, as it goes out to consultation, really should reflect that best evidence, and that evidence supports a more robust inclusionary zoning strategy that generates more affordable housing for longer periods of time for people living on low incomes. In just the very last minute that I've got, though, I do want to take the opportunity to say the city has done something terrific here. For all of the critique that people are bringing forward about trying to make sure we have the best inclusionary zoning policy, the city's a leader in this, the City of Toronto. It's one of the first inclusionary zoning policies to come forward. It's a critical policy that needs to be developed, and the city should be lauded for launching down that road and should take the opportunity, as it does that very important work, to do it as well as humanly possible, which the new research supports. And to get it right for Toronto. And the other thing I want to mention is that getting it right for Toronto means protecting the right of local municipalities to make local decisions about planning, to get Bill 108 out of micromanaging your lives so you can build an inclusionary zoning strategy, and every city in Ontario can, that reflects the real market conditions here that Steve Pomeroy has looked so closely into and that can guide our best possible policy.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, and thank you, Sean, for the deputation. With respect to other jurisdictions that have placed a term limit on affordability, whether it's 25 or sometimes 10 years, I know in the City of Toronto we've had sort of expiration dates on affordability. What happens after that?
So in jurisdictions like Boston and New York, what happens after that is they spend staggering sums of public money to buy back those very same units that they didn't adequately regulate in the first place. So it is not only a short-sighted policy that serves low-income renters poorly, but it's also a very poor policy for taxpayers because they end up paying a lot in the end. I believe New York spent north of $1 billion regaining all the units that timed out on them in their earlier policies that were time limited. The Boston tenants associations campaigned for years to try and recover those units because their residents were being turfed.
And for the $1 billion that New York spent to recapture those timed out units, what was their success rate? Were they able to get back 100% of those affordable units that expired?
I don't believe they got them all, but that's part of the challenge. And what you can get if you start in the right direction is you get all of those units, you get them perpetually, you don't have to pay for them twice, and you don't miss any. So the public policy direction is pretty clear.
And when you're trying to renegotiate once the term expires, are you negotiating in current dollars, or is it retroactively going back to when those units were valued, for example, 25 years ago? So therefore, if we do something today has a 25-year term expiration, when we want to recapture and bring it back onto the affordable market, are we now paying the prices in 2040? Those valuations.
You're going to pay the prices in 2040, and you're going to pay it for current dollars. Future dollars are always cheaper than current dollars. So if you look at the actual economic impact of, say, extending from 50 to 80 or 80 to 100 or 99 years of affordability, it's nearly zero, unless you wait for those 50 years and then try and buy them 50 years later, and then it's full value. So you absolutely don't want to be in that position. You want to be negotiating right now.
The proposed policy direction that staff have put before us is to try to define the price of affordable market rates. And right now, we've been using 80% of AMR, and yet I think the lived experience for many individuals who are low income or even working class or middle class is that Toronto's housing market has just gone in such a direction that 80% of average market rents is actually really too expensive. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there's various gradations that you can use, and just going in very round numbers. If you want to be able to house people living on disability income supports, you need to be at about 40% of AMR. If you want to be able to house people who are in working environments, you want to be at about 60, and that's about the extent of what a capital project, capital policy can provide for. And at 80% of AMR, you're moving up into things that a lot of people can't afford. A lot of people in this room can't afford.
And then just my final question. With respect to the eligible household incomes that's stated in the policy as proposed today, there's the statement is that anywhere from 35,000 to 67,000 for renters is the 30th to 60th percentile of income. Does that annual income meet the market challenges of housing right now?
So there's a variety of housing challenges. As I mentioned, there are a lot of people who can't afford housing. One of the reasons why Councillor Perks has been so adamant about protecting dwelling rooms is there are a lot of people who can't afford any apartment in Toronto. The dwelling room is the price range that they can hit. And that's, again, down around 40% of AMR, well below that range that you're describing. The range that you're describing really is sort of a middle working level, and that's important for some folks, but doesn't solve all of the different housing problems we've got. We've got a lot of different affordabilities that we have to hit. Jurisdictions like New York City have recognized that and varied their inclusionary zoning policy to hit different levels of affordability, recognizing the environment that they're in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing more questions, I do have a couple of questions. So you talk about evidence-based, and so there was a study that the legislation actually required us to produce an economic study, and you looked at that data. Did you have the opportunity to actually sit down with our staff and the people that did the study? Would you welcome the opportunity to go through the numbers and to present your analysis together so that we can actually bring these numbers together?
Absolutely, and how these things play out in the real world is very granular and very varied. We did have a chance to sit down, and the city staff who worked on this policy have been incredibly collaborative and open with the advocacy community on this work, as I know they have with the industry. We've had a chance to talk to the folks at NBLC as well and compare notes and make sure that we're all on roughly the same page. What we've tried to do is just dig a little deeper into the data, and we're happy to continue to do that work with the city and with NBLC.
Okay. And your advice for the committee and to council is to really look at the numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, as emotional as we are about this issue, we need the numbers to show what we're going to be able to possible and push that to the limit that we can get, right?
Yeah, we need evidence-based policy making. That's going to require looking at the numbers and trying to figure out how we can hit our goals, our social goals, with a clean eye to the data that we have in front of us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Richard Drudla? Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. As some of you might know, I'm a affordable housing consultant. I've been involved in inclusionary zoning in terms in researching it, writing about it, and advocating for virtually 20 years now. The city's current policy projection, in my mind, is a very, very good start. I think the staff should be commended for the approach they've taken and the work they've done to date, and especially moving ahead so quickly on what we all know is a very complicated subject. Inclusionary zoning has great potential for the city. It could produce something like 2,500 units per year of new affordable housing without needing financial subsidies or regulatory concessions. That number would dwarf any other output from any other program the city has ever tried to date. and dwarf it by considerable numbers. But why that number is large, it's actually quite small compared to the housing need. And therefore, I think it's very important we try to use this tool to the absolute fullest that we can do. My concern is that we're not doing that with the current policies so far. They fall short in a number of places in actually maximizing the amount of housing we can get from the program. They do this in they fall short in perhaps 4 different ways. First of all, they limit inclusionary zoning to certain areas, where best practice in the U.S. clearly show that you can apply inclusionary across the whole city, not to limited areas. They're applying set-asides of less than 20%. 20% is a very good set-aside. It's consistent with best practices. But again, in the U.S., it's applied universally, not in specific areas, and they do not use lower set-asides in other areas. It also falls short by exempting certain developments, large developments of 100 units or less, or 140 or less. In the U.S., the best practice clearly is to have projects down to 10 units or more, making them subject to affordable housing. And it's also falling short by possibly limiting the application of inclusionary zoning to the uptake, to the uplift caused by rezoning, and not also just to the base density, base approved density. That's also in the United States, both are applied for, the inclusionary zoning is applied to both categories of development. If all of these different limits begin to chip away at the potential for inclusionary zoning, it's hard to estimate what that might be, but I could guess that by applying all these conditions, we are actually reducing in half the affordable housing we're going to produce by inclusionary zoning, and that's a considerable cutback in housing we all desperately need. I understand there may be reasons for some of these policies, but I think we should be aware and cognizant of the impact on the provision of affordable housing when we use them, and ensure that the trade-off of the benefits and the costs are worth it. Moving on to affordability controls. This aspect has been considered a number of times already today. Again, we're falling short in my mind. The best practice in the United States have clearly moved to permanent affordability. What that means in various programs varies from at least 50 years. Sometimes it means for the life of the building. Sometimes it actually means perpetuity. We are using, and the policy directions are using to 25 years. This has been the norm for many years, but frankly, it's just not good enough. The only way you can justify using a 25-year limit is if you actually believe that in 25 years, the affordable housing crisis is going to disappear. I think if you believe that, you're a minority of one. The great problem is once you apply limits to the duration of the affordability, at some time in the future, you can start losing these units. And what's happened in the United States in many jurisdictions, they have found they've actually started to lose more affordable units than they are creating any time due to the expiration of these controls. So it's very important that we move to something like a permanent affordability and don't put these units at risk. Last of all, a brief word on Bill 108. The provisions of this bill, if ever applied, would be disastrous. They would set back the timing for getting inclusionary zoning for at least 2 to 3 years, if not more. And when we did get it, it would be a very fragmented and piecemeal approach. On top of that, it would considerably limit the places where affordable housing would be applied and reduce even further the amount of affordable housing we could achieve. It's very clear from the President's of the United States and experience there that there's no real reason for making the limitations that the city is proposing.
Great. Thank you. Any questions of the deputy? I do have one, Richard. So you do consulting for affordable housing, so you're probably familiar with all these numbers. Did you have an opportunity to look through the assessment report that was done?
Yes, the financial assessment, yes.
And so your deputation is based on analyzing those numbers?
No, it's my experience in terms of analyzing what's happening in the United States. My expertise is more on the regulatory side than the financial side.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, your question just jogged something. With respect to creating affordable units with a foreverness in mind, in perpetuity, if the development industry pushes back, and of course they will, and they do all the time, in this committee room and in the hallways and in the boardrooms of City Hall, and they say the numbers just don't work, cannot be done, but yet the profits that they walk, they get to hold that and own that forever. Is that not true?
Yes.
So if they can walk away with record profits in perpetuity based on that particular application, would it not make sense that the affordable units that we retain would also be in perpetuity?
Well, certainly, I would. That's a basis of my argument. Yes, we can, we should, and we can do it. And the experience in the United States very clearly shows that they can guarantee and control the units in perpetuity.
Yeah, so it does happen in other jurisdictions.
Yes.
And they've been able to make those numbers work.
Yes.
Is our development industry under such hardship that it cannot work here, where they can make it work in New York City, for example? Or they try anyways. Like what's so special about our development sector that everything that we try to put forward to say be a better city building partner with us, they say they can't do it? Like what's so different doing business in Toronto?
Well, I think our development industry and our approach to development is very similar to that in the United States. I don't see any clear distinction that would merit special considerations here, or we're limiting how we can deal with affordability. I think we have a very similar approaches to development. So.
Yeah. But would you say that one of the differences is that, of course, in some American cities, they've already implemented inclusionary zoning in sort of softer, easier to digest, more commercially acceptable terms and conditions, and they have found that it hasn't quite worked out for the cities, municipalities, and those who need deeply affordable housing?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand your question, but again, in the States, new programs are now going to permanent affordability, and existing programs have been consistently increasing the term to permanent affordability. Earlier programs did not, but they've learned the hard lesson that indeed there's no reason why they can't go to the longer terms.
Thank you. So they've learned the lesson. We don't need to repeat the lesson.
Well, that's the hope. There's 50 years of experience there we can look at, and it's very clear on this subject.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Peter Zimmerman? Peter Zimmerman? No? Okay. Next one, Joy Connolly? Good morning, Joy.
Good morning, and thanks for this opportunity. 1 month ago, UN Special Rapporteur Leilani Farha sat in this chair and inspired us with a call to uphold housing rights. Today, you have the chance to put a human rights lens into practice. The object of inclusionary zoning is inclusion, a worthy human rights goal. So let's examine the policy before you to see who is included and who is excluded. In your package, I sent you 2 examples of the proposed policy direction in action. 1, a new condo in the hottest market in town. 1, a rental building in a moderate market. Because I have only a few minutes, I'm only going to just recap the findings. Here's what I saw. A condo where the developer gets triple the density allowed under the original zoning. What do we get in return? Under the proposed policy direction, 13% of the building would be affordable for 30% of Toronto renters. Let the lottery begin. The building's remaining 87%, affordable to fewer than 10% of renters that make more than $150,000 a year. Example number 2, a rental building. The developer gets a nice 50% bump over the as-of-right density, and yet less than 1% of that building is affordable. The remaining 99% of the building, you need an income of $80,000 or more. That's only 27% of Toronto renter households. Everyone else, shut out. So here's my question. Why would the city hand out huge benefits to developers every time it upzones and ask so little in return? What are we afraid of? In this proposal, everyone gets paid out in full. The home builders should be happy. They're getting the same profit as they do now. Construction and soft costs, same as now. The condo purchasers and renters in the rest of the building will be paying what they do now because, as your consultant's report says outright, developers charge whatever they can get. And even though costs have been rising, prices have outstripped costs. I gather the real risk and what people's fear is of upping the affordable components is that land speculators, people who hold on to land with the object of making a profit, will just sit on their land and wait for the market to get even crazier or for this policy to just go away. Or they will sell their property for something other than housing. But how big a risk is that really? Remember, speculators won't lose money. They just might not get as much money as they feel they deserve. And if they do sit on their land, a condo without inclusionary zoning excludes over 90% of Toronto's renters. If it doesn't get built, is that really such a loss? And finally this. I'm using a human rights lens to analyze who is included and who is left out. But the other human rights issue is this. When we weigh the necessity, the right to have a secure home, and the wish, the gamble really, of making a profit on the land you own, they do not weigh equally in the balance. I know you know all this. I also know that in this province, land speculators and developers are a powerful lobby. But here it is. People don't like seeing tower after tower going up, knowing that neither they nor their kids can afford to live there. Your leadership on this issue, strengthening the proposed proposal, as you heard people like Sean Maher and Richard Dirtles speak to, and then navigating through the province, taking courage and persistence. But if you can take this issue to the streets and describe it not as inclusionary zoning, because no one knows what that is, but what it really means for you and your family, an army of your constituents will be behind you. I say go for it.
Thank you, Joy. Any questions? Seeing none. Adam Riggio. Is that Adam? Okay. Good morning, Adam.
Thank you, committee members. This is the first time I've been here to testify on behalf of, myself, my fellow citizens to you. So I'm glad I could be here, and thank you for having me. So, excuse me. The first thing I want to say is to thank the other speakers who've brought the concerns of other people and local activists and organizations of Torontonians here, because I'm just kind of adding to what they have to say, particularly regarding the standards of inclusionary zoning in the proposed plan, the 100, that we've been talking about, which is the, just a second to get my notes. Any buildings larger than 100 units downtown and 140 everywhere else, asking for 5% of rental, 10% of condos for affordability. I agree with many of the people who have spoken here that is not enough. And I have, when I've looked at some of the details of this report that my colleagues have shared with me, one of the things that I see is that proposal, especially regarding condos, is it is good in some ways, in that it can help some middle-class people who may not have a whole lot of family wealth, outsized family wealth, to inherit, to get on the property ladder in Toronto. In the modern housing crisis, one of the things that people forget about is not just the vulnerable people, but people who are first-generation Torontonians, people who do not have the advantage of potentially inheriting homes from their parents or or older family members whose homes have grown in value by more than 100, 200% since their purchase. People who do not have those advantages, this plan that you're bringing forward does help those people. The problem is that it does not go far enough, and there are many, even in the most respectable, stereotypically respectable elements of the middle class that do not, that this policy does not help. In other words, it is not adequate to people, the people I want to talk about today, who are facing sudden, severe housing insecurity. Other folks have talked about people who face perpetual housing insecurity. I want to bring up the example of people who face sudden housing insecurity. People who have lower middle class to middle class incomes, but perhaps not the greatest in terms of savings, right? Lower class to middle class incomes whose income remains insecure, who are flexible, who work temporary contract jobs that may pay several $1,000s at a time, but for whom, whether or not they have those contracts, that is variable. Who have some months where they make maybe $2,000 to $3,000, and some months where they make far less than that, and have to coast by on what they can save from that, and it makes saving difficult for them. The policies, the proposals that are up in front of you, they don't go far enough to help those people. It doesn't go far enough to help people who suffer from renoviction. It doesn't go far enough to help people who suffer sudden job loss, right? Not even through fault of their own, which are stigmatized enough, but there's no reason why if you were fired, you should lose your home, morally speaking. It does not help people who find themselves housing unstable due to things like family collapse, relationship breakups. If someone has to move out of a home that they were paying half the rent for and now has to move into a home that they're paying full rent for, that can be a massive increase on their housing expenses that they might not have predicted several months prior.
Adam, I'm going to have to ask you to start
Oh, yeah,
wrapping up.
yeah. And I want to mention as well, very briefly, that there is another group of people who suffer extra instability among the more respectable lower to middle classes, and those are pet owners, people who, where many rental properties forbid pet ownership. I myself know someone who was homeless for 3 months because despite his an income that fits in the lower middle class of about $30,000 to $40,000 a year, it took him 3 months to find a rental property in the city that he could afford and that would accept also his dog. That is something that we've heard about the very, very vulnerable. We've heard about the very, very wealthy. We do not hear about the suddenly vulnerable, the unpredictably vulnerable. And I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. And thanks so much. Sorry.
Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today. Next, Emily Purdy.
Hi there. Thanks very, very much for having me here today. And I also want to say it's such an honor to speak in a room full of people, and particularly I'm very heartened to hear the deputations of ACORN members today, and the previous deputant, to remind us of the importance of this piece of policy for working people and low and moderate income people in Toronto. My thanks also to this committee and especially to staff and City Council for their strong legacy of support for inclusionary zoning and diligent work on the detailed needs analysis and policy options that are before us today. IZ is an indispensable tool for Toronto, and it's critical that this committee move forward with the consultations so that IZ can be enacted as soon as possible. And at the same time, as we've heard the policy directions before you today, unnecessarily restrict the scope of options for consultation. And so I'm here to urge the committee to amend the policy directions for public consultation with reference to 3 key areas: boldness, affordability period, and policy objective. First, in terms of boldness, the policy options before you timidly restrict the proposed market areas, building sizes, set-asides, and depth of affordability for IZ in Toronto. The rationale for these restrictions is the fear that IZ will suppress housing development or result in higher housing prices. But U.S. evidence shows that this fear need not limit Toronto's approach to IZ. A comprehensive review of 500 U.S. jurisdictions clearly demonstrates that IZ does not suppress housing development or significantly increase housing costs in active markets like Toronto's. We can safely be bolder in our proposals. Secondly, the affordability period. The proposed policy directions for consultation restrict the affordability period to 25 years, and as previous deputants have already pointed out, this flies in the face of U.S. evidence. Similar jurisdictions to Toronto, such as Chicago, have significantly increased their affordability periods in order to stem the loss of affordable stock that they begin to experience after 25 years. 30% of U.S. jurisdictions now require perpetual or 99-year affordability, and many more achieve perpetual affordability in effect through their administration of IZ units by handing these over to nonprofit organizations for administration as affordable in perpetuity. Toronto doesn't have to learn this lesson the hard way by trying to revise our mistakes 25 years down the line. We should start with a perpetual affordability period. And the city's own analysis demonstrates that a 99-year period is feasible. And finally, the policy objective. Joy Connolly has spoken eloquently to this. The feasibility analysis on which the policy directions are based applied a single scenario to a range of Toronto submarkets. And the resulting proposed policy options limit IZ to the size of development, the locations, the set-aside, and the depth of affordability that were considered feasible for that one scenario. The analysis prepared by Steve Pomeroy that was presented by Sean Mahar earlier took a different approach. Using the same assumptions about costs and profit as the city's analysis, that one aimed to identify what percentage of affordable units could be achieved and at what depth of affordability in various submarkets across the city. And this approach found a much broader scope of feasibility for IZ in Toronto. This is the approach embraced by recent and effective IZ programs, such as that in New York City, which allow a number of factors to be brought into play with an aim to produce the most affordable housing possible in each new development. And Toronto's IZ framework should be based on the same policy aim, and this should be the question and the foundation for discussions at consultation. How do we achieve the maximum affordable housing possible in each new development? That framework would put people first, and that would be consistent with the rights-based approach to housing recently embraced by Council at the motion of this committee, and bring our city a step closer to realizing the right to adequate housing for Torontonians.
Oh, perfect timing. Okay, any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, one, Councillor Wong Tam.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emily, for your deputation. With respect to the submission that was just put before us by Sean Mahar, and this is, of course, the inclusionary zoning policy options based on detailed market analysis. You've just referenced it. And specifically that their report builds on the data that was utilized by the Enberry Lyon consulting firm, but they actually took it into a couple other directions that NBLC did not. If there were 2 or 3 takeaways from this succinct report, what do you want staff to know about it? Because obviously the staff decided to sculpt it and it was much more narrow. This other group said we're going to go much wider. What is the major takeaway from this from the Pomeroy and Mahar report?
I would say the key top line is we need a bold policy approach that aims to achieve the maximum affordability for the maximum duration and the maximum number of units in each new development. We recognize that there are sub-market conditions in Toronto. We recognize also, though, that those are going to change over time. We need an adaptable framework that enables us to use all of those different factors to achieve maximum affordability.
And so is your conclusion here that by not looking at the data more broadly with multiple scenarios before us, is that the City of Toronto could be walking into the consultations with some preset conditions that you're not going to get the biggest options coming out of it?
Exactly. I think that, IZ is so complex. It's really difficult to host a public consultation about something like IZ. And, my admiration goes to staff who will be planning those. If we unnecessarily restrict the options that are presented to the public, there won't be a fulsome understanding of what can really be achieved through IZ. And as other deputants have said, it's not a great way to start a negotiation. I think everyone in this room recognizes the potential impacts of Bill 108. We appreciate and support the city's determination to keep moving forward with IZ and to continue to deliver affordable housing. And we know that the public is there in support of this. We just want to make sure that when we're consulting, we're offering people kind of the full breadth of information about the possibilities of this policy tool.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Daryl Chung? I don't think Daryl is in the room. Next deputant, Beryl Yan Mark. Good morning.
Hi, everyone. I want to say I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm here as a concerned citizen, and I'll be speaking on my lived experience. I'm a single parent with I have 5 children in total, but I have 3 young ones that live with me. The others are adults. There's a boy and 2 girls. And one of the things that happened in our home, when the girls are changing their clothes, he has to leave the room. And he's 6 years old, so it's a little bit difficult for me to explain to him that he has to leave the room. And it's not just in my apartment, but in other other apartments in my building, there are people who are on the house also. There are teenagers. Right now, there's 2 teenagers who are sharing the same bedroom. To me, that's unacceptable. I know we could do better. I'm saying let your conscience be your guide and help with the housing crisis that we are experiencing in the city. I know this woman who lived in Canada for over 35 years. She has never been in trouble with the law. And guess what? She got evicted. She has nowhere to go. And the landlord took her to court. She's feeling helpless, I could tell you, with her children and her nephews, who are all adults living in their apartment. One sec. The problem that many people are facing in this city is that they can't, or it's difficult, or it's next to impossible to afford the rent, to pay rent. And I'm saying we need deeply affordable social housing where people could live in dignity. They could live with joy and happiness We need to help people with their well-being. Without that, it's impossible or next to impossible for people to reach their full human potential. Let's help them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Dave Langley? Good morning, Dave.
As you just mentioned, my name is David Langley. I'm a Parkdale resident as well as an ambassador. I've also lived in the West End, East End, London, Sarnia, and Buffalo. Toronto, I've found, been here over 35 years now, has been one of the worst places I've been to live. And we were one of the best places. We've fallen back with our housing situations, with our people. Now, I applaud what the city has done, a council, with your proposals. But I do have a couple of questions. Your inclusionary zoning, okay? If you look at your targets and everything else and your numbers and that, it's way too low. If you look at the homeless, the shelters, people are couch surfing, moving in with families because they have no jobs, no ability to afford housing, all those factors, it's way too low. We have so many more people that if you give them a drop in a bucket, there's more that's going to replace it. We're never going to come to terms with ending it. We're just going to sustain a little bit of those people. The developments, we worked it out the other day, over 770 years, there's 28 substantially deseated housing. 28 out of 770 unit building, and we got thousands and thousands of people homeless. So what's that leave us within our homeless, what do you want, quantity? We are having more and more people come to Toronto. The Prime Minister was talking about getting 200,000 immigrants coming here. Where are they coming? Other places weren't taking them, Toronto. We're not saying no, we're just saying we need help. Okay, the other thing is the time limit you have for affordability. Why should there be a time limit? Okay, it takes you forever to get housing to start with. If you are lucky to get a affordable housing that you can afford, and you get 25 years. So 26 years, it's up there, you can't afford it, it's back to square one, on the streets, homeless, whatever. There should never be a time limit or pressure on somebody that you have to, within so many years, you guys search. There is opportunities. When you're talking with builders and that, I worked in real estate. I was top 3%, worked with developers in pre-sale and resale. They make hand over fist money. They balk and squawk because their bottom line is profit, profit, profit. And when they've been making profit for many, many years, why are they going to back down and say, oh, I'm going to lose money because you want this, this, and this? No. Pre-sale builders actually devise their buildings to delay and delay, so people actually will walk out of their agreements. So they make what? Buy it back and make more money. So builders actually are using everything against the cities and that as threats because they won't build in that. It's a bluff because they have the resources, the money in that. They want more money. They want their name out there. That's one thing. And I actually, as I said, was top 3% real estate, big manager and everything else. I got critically ill in 2004, nearly died a few times. I got neurocognitive issues, mental health issues. When I was in the hospital, my condo was sold out from under me from my friend that was my power of attorney. All my finances and that were taken. I ended up homeless on the streets. I ended up in a boarding home. And when people think housing isn't what we consider, what may you consider. Roof over your head is not a house. A place where people have feces on the floors, there's urine everywhere, you're treated like a prisoner, treated like dirt, violence, threats, everything else. That's not housing. A home is a proper place with proper running plumbing, proper maintenance, where you can get a shut-eye. When you're in just a house with a roof, you're not sleeping. You're afraid for your life. I ended up contracting MRSA 5 times. I was hospitalized for it because of the conditions, the amount of people there.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
So I'm on an emergency housing list still from being the crap beat out of me in a shelter. That's 4 years ago, emergency housing, okay? Where am I? I'm still on the list. I'm in a place now, I'm still, the person tried to blow it up, burn it down, and kill people for over 12 years. That is not adequate housing. So when you're talking about amount of units coming available, deep affordability, and the long term, look at, is it a home or just a roof over the head that you said we did our job? I'm just asking, please look at it in a bigger lens. Go out there, talk to the people, and see why they're out there.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Next, Deputy Jeremy Whitters. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Withers. I'm a PhD student at U of T, and I study affordable housing policy. I'm also a member of a group of housing advocates, many of whom are deputing today, whose concerns with the policy direction I share, and whose recommendations for amending the direction endorsed by this committee I reaffirm and will add to. So I want to start by saying how proud many of us are to have councillors and planners taking the lead on this initiative. As the first municipality in Ontario to go ahead with inclusionary zoning, we've got over a third of the population of Canada looking to us in this room for inspiration on how to get this right. So there's a lot at stake. The policy direction before us mentions that only 2% of housing units built in the past decade in Toronto have been rented at or below what we currently call affordable. That's 80% of AMR. So since before I was born, Toronto's housing market has completely failed low and middle income renters. And I'm excited to begin consultations as to how we can change that. But like many who've come out to depute this morning, I'm worried that the current policy direction will not set us up to do so. So as currently written, the direction implies that IZ should only be used to provide upper middle income folk, people between the 45th and 65th percentiles, with affordable rental units and with discounts on condos. This neglect of the poorer half of renters in Toronto has long defined affordable housing policy in this city. As we direct consultations on IZ over the coming months, we have an important opportunity to buck that trend. So my first recommendation for how we can do so is that you endorse as the basis for consultation an amendment to this problem by deleting the policy direction's recommendation that upwards of 90% of set-asides created for rental should be priced at 100% AMR. In its place, I recommend you endorse the proposition that the mix of type and affordability of units set aside from each development be set in response to the mix of households whose right to adequate housing has been violated. The vast majority of Torontonians in core housing need are renters at the bottom third of the income spectrum, making less than $40,000 a year. The vacancy rate for units remotely affordable to these groups is practically zero. They're the ones that most desperately need new supply, and this policy should be aiming to provide it. My second recommendation is that, as the basis for consultation, the committee endorses area median income as the measure through which different tiers of affordable housing be defined. In doing so, the committee would align the definition for affordable rental with the definition for affordable ownership that is being proposed by planning staff in this direction. It's worth asking staff, why update the definition of affordable ownership, but not rental? In updating the definition of affordable rental, I believe the committee would also be taking an important step towards ensuring human rights-based analyses are being made whenever potential housing policies are being compared. Defining affordable housing in terms of different tiers of AMI would place front and center an awareness of which groups these units will be affordable for, and the proportion of the group whose right to adequate housing is being violated. So we have an opportunity long awaited to do so today. My third recommendation is that you delete the policy direction's recommendation that, and I quote, where rental units are to be conveyed at no cost to the city for the purposes of long-lasting affordability or deeper affordability, the provision of affordable housing will be reduced by 50%. Now, it seems completely arbitrary to reduce the number of units set aside by half, just because the unit is being set aside for a social housing provider. The type of owner should not determine the proportion of set-asides. The relative reduction in the cost of ownership should. So over the coming months, as we determine the appropriate mix and depth of affordability of each unit, let's do so with reference both to what the market can bear and to what the greatest need is on the ground. The type of person or organization that will come to own that affordable unit should have no bearing on these considerations. With inclusionary zoning, we have the power to significantly amend how and for whom development takes place in this province. I hope the coming months of consultations will also provide an opportunity to rethink how and for whom all of our affordable housing policies are working, so we can tackle head-on a human rights violation, which 1 in 3 Toronto's renters are one eviction away from
start wrapping up, okay?
I'm wrapped up.
Oh, that's it?
That's it.
Oh. I knew it. Any questions?
Yes, I do.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. That's very exciting that you're studying that. There's inclusionary zoning where that's a developer that owns that land and is proposing a development, so we're trying to add units there. Do you have any thoughts about if that development can only, basically if that development requires a piece of city land in order to proceed, perhaps from parking authority or another another agency of which the base owner is the City of Toronto? Have you given any thought to that and what our policy should be there?
So
You had a chance to think about that?
your policies around housing now, I believe, are working to...
Those are 11 sites that are already determined, but
Yes.
there are other agencies and there are other boards, agencies that own land that are liquidating or making deals with developers, or particularly the parking authority. Do you have any thoughts, or have you looked at all about what that obligation should be at that moment to include affordable housing?
Yeah, so you have the opportunity to work with developers, or these third-party organizations have the opportunity to work with private developers to create a mix of perhaps private and some affordable units that could be owned by social housing providers. I think that the model we're seeing over the last 4 years in Vancouver is very impressive as a way to deal with that, because when the city works with the Cooperative Housing Federation, who's developed a development arm, to actually build these themselves, and they get a much deeper and wider mix of affordability because of working with that group. And Tom Armstrong, who's the head of Cooperative Housing Federation, will actually be speaking here on June 4th. We'll be speaking at U of T on June 4th to discuss that model, and I really encourage all of you to come.
So are you aware that parking authority liquidates land to a developer without any obligation to include affordable housing? Are you aware of that?
That's disturbing, and
That's news to you?
What's that?
That's news to you?
I guess. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Might be news to a lot of people, but we'll talk
Yeah.
about that.
Okay.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you, Jeremy. Rosetta Auxor? Rosetta? Oh, there you are. Good morning, Rosetta.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rosetta Alexov, and I'm here with CIRA, Center for Equality Rights in Accommodation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the committee. I'd like to start off by saying that CIRA appreciates the leadership of the city, both councillors and city staff, in advocating for inclusionary zoning with the provincial government. We know there will be a consultation process and open channels for input along the way, and we very much look forward to being a part of that process. CIRA's deputation today is informed by the view shared by Leilani Farah, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, that, like many other cities around the world, Toronto has a housing crisis. CIRA believes that in order to address this crisis, the city needs to leverage all the policy tools and at its disposal and use them to their maximum potential. Inclusionary zoning alone is not going to fix the Toronto's housing crisis, but it can go a long way in being an important lever that, when combined with other policy levers, can help us address the crisis in a meaningful way. CIRA's deputation today is also informed by human rights. We would like to recognize the leadership of this committee and commend its bold action in inviting the UN Special Rapporteur to its last meeting, passing anonymously a motion to direct city staff to take a rights-based approach to the 10 years housing plan. And as you know, the City Council passed the motion anonymously. This simple yet incredibly powerful act has done more to change the trajectory of housing policy in this city than any other action in recent memory, and I think it's important to recognize the importance of that move. Before you today is an opportunity to walk the walk of a rights-based approach to housing. CIRA is here today to respectfully submit that this current path upon which inclusionary zoning is tracking does not reflect a rights-based approach, nor does it leverage inclusionary zoning in a way that maximizes the opportunity it provides. CIRA is therefore requesting that the committee expand the parameters of the inclusionary zoning consultation in order to embed human rights approach in inclusionary zoning that will result in the creation of as much affordable housing as possible for the people who need it. We have three main channels to propose to be reflected in the planning consultations. First, inclusionary zoning should be applied to every new development. It should be applied in all market areas of the city and at higher set-aside rates than what is proposed in the report. Inclusionary zoning requirements should also apply to developments that are significantly smaller than what is proposed in the report. Each of these adjustments would create a fair greater supply of affordable housing than would be created under the current proposed approach. Second, the affordable housing created through inclusionary zoning should be kept affordable for as long as possible, and there appears to be a significant amount of consensus among those of us in the sector that 25 years is not enough. Finally, the inclusionary zoning units created should reach deeper levels of rental housing affordability wherever possible to reflect the need for deeply affordable rental housing. This aligns with the human rights principle of prioritizing those with the greatest need. These three proposed changes are grounded in evidence as presented by the paper drafted by Sean Maher and Steve Pomeroy. CIRA understands and appreciates that policymaking involves a balancing of the interests of different groups, but it's also important to keep in mind that not all the interests are equal, and therefore they do not require equal consideration. This is where a rights-based approach can be very helpful. The city has already heard and will no doubt continue to hear from stakeholders opposed to inclusionary zoning for reasons ranging from the impact that it has on the expected profits of developers to homeowners concerned about their property values. However, a rights-based approach helps us to understand that it's simply not true that individual property rights or the ability to make a particular profit margin must be balanced equally against the right of people to be able to live and thrive in the city of Toronto.
Rosette, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. It's over 5
A
minutes.
rights-based approach tells us that someone's right to safe, adequate, and affordable housing is worthy of greater consideration. And in the end, I would just like to thank the committee for the leadership in integrating human rights-based approach to housing.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Seeing none. Hisham Alsbach. Oh, Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Rosetta, for your deputation. And just to confirm, by way of City Council adopting a human rights approach to housing, which we just did at the last council meeting, in this report, as it is written, a human rights approach would most likely mean that we would have to take everyone's needs into consideration so that we can reach the greatest number of people through this report and, of course, the direction out of policy and the outcomes. Currently, as you read it, this report, does it does it embrace the human rights approach to housing through to reach the widest number of people?
I don't see the report in a way that represents human rights-based approach. The lens I see in the report is how to make development viable and how to protect land residual value and things like that. And I think that's the opposite from human rights-based approach, where we start developing a policy from a perspective, what's the needs of people and what's their basic needs to be safely, adequately housed.
So if we were to do a pivot at this committee where we have to take everyone's housing needs into consideration, and that means those who are on fixed income as seniors, as well as those who are living on social works and limited ability to pay, as well as those who are working class and middle class. We need to change what is before us in order for us to put that rights-based analysis over this report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next, Deputant Hisham Alasbak. Good morning. How are you? Yeah, I believe the table goes up. Do we have somebody that could? Hisham, we have somebody to help you. There you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hisham. I'm a member of ACON. Also, I am a newcomer. I also have issues with affordable housing. And I think affordable housing should be based on our income, not on the rent market. Because now I have my sponsorship will be finished soon, and I cannot afford to rent my unit. Because one bedroom on Western Road, it costs $1,400 just for one bedroom. Also, the market rent considered for the government $1,400 or $1,500, it's affordable. But is it affordable for everyone, or to whom it's affordable? And we must build more affordable units, and we must keep them not for 10 years or 15 years or 25. We must keep them forever. Affordable units must be for everyone. And like I said before, I'm newcomer here, and I don't know where I can live now after my sponsorship will be finished. Because $1,400, ODSP will not pay it. Also, how much I can afford to live. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, Deputant Ko Hosoya. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Ko, and thank you for having me. I would like to represent an example of how people in Parkdale live their daily lives. I moved to Parkdale 14 years ago, and since then, I witnessed a huge change in my neighborhood. When I started our lives in Canada, all we had was 2 suitcases each. Then I gradually got to know the people in my community, and they gave me furniture and food. They invited me for dinner, even though they depend on food bank and social support. So in first couple of years, I survived like that. There are many organizations which support community people in Parkdale as well. I attended language classes in the basement of the library and cultural link. I could receive medical services at the Parkdale Community Health Center. I may not be able to access these services if these organizations aren't in my community. These organizations and neighbors are an essential lifeline for people like me. Those people I met in my community have already experienced extreme trauma before they moved to Canada. Many people have already faced displacement from their home countries and now faced displacement again through rising rent. People could manage their lives in Parkdale before the gentrification. Now so many people are forced to move out. There are no places to go but on the street. I sometimes feel that wild animals and plants have much more care and protection than us. I believe that rent should be affordable to these existing community members. Inclusionary zoning offers one pathway towards this goal. But the way the policy is currently drafted is not strong enough. In Parkdale, we have put forward a demand for 30% permanently affordable housing, including deeply affordable units, accessible units, and adequate sized units. We also have a call for 20% permanently affordable housing in developments less than 100 units. We need to set strong targets to ensure that places like Parkdale can still exist. I love my community, and I believe that the city needs to do better. Thank you.
Let me put my mic on. Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Last speaker, Lalitha Pagaskarla. And if I could have staff getting ready for the presentation. This is the last speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lalita. I came from Parkdale. So I came to Canada in 2014. When I came, like my career, like here, like it was like so scary. Like when I came from my back home, like to here, I thought like Canada is the rich country, so I can't see like any homeless people like in my back home like that. But first day in my life, I still like remember when I came like out, one of the guy, like he just like jumped on me and he just like asked for the stuff. I was scared and I just gave my purse to him and I came out. So recently, my house got broken, like my apartment got broken. I live in like 1251 King Street West. My apartment broken like in the afternoon, like around 3 o'clock. I just go and pick my kid like from the school. Like within half an hour, they took like everything from my house, like literally like nothing. Like I have one pair of extra glasses for my son, so they took like everything literally. So I was like so helpless. So I am like asking you like right now, is there any chance like to make like my Parkdale like without homeless people like on the roads? So I'm just like, I was not like good at English. I'm like scared like to talk with the people. So like my voice is also be some glazed kind of thing. And I was like nervous like right now because I never see like this many people like at a time like to talk like in front of this stage kind of thing. So is it possible for you guys, like anything, to give like my park day, like especially like these things happens to me, but still like I want to stay like in Parkdale only. So if there is like anything we lost in that particular area, I have to grab the same thing like from the thing. That's like my opinion. And so I strongly believe that like Parkdale is not like that much worse like area, but we need like the people like who live in that area, like they need like affordable housing, like at least like for 30%. For the people like, okay, so now developers are coming like for asking, they want like some place. So if you are going to keep on like giving the space, the people who live like in that area, the rents are going to be like high. We came in Canada in 2014. At that time, I just like pay like $1,200. So whenever my house got robbed, my kid was like scared, and we just like want to change the apartment. At that time, I just like asked like for the other apartment. They said like, I have to pay $1,700 for single bedroom house. So which is going to be very, very hard like for the family like who came like from the back home. So it is very hard like to offer the new, I mean like to get like the new house like from the same apartment itself. So assume that the people who are coming like from the outside, like outside countries, they came like here to get like the apartment. It's not that much easy, like especially in that area. That before like it was cheaper. Now like now the rent is getting like higher and higher. So in my apartment, there is like rent strike also happened because they increase the rents like very, very frequently. I mean like the percentage, like whatever they want to hike it, like it is going to be like higher. So is there is any possible for the newcomers also, like the rent has to be like, we can give like any cap like to the landlord stating that the rent has to be like until to this mark. If they are increasing like every year, like if I vacate my apartment right now, if I came like for tomorrow, if they are going to be say that, hey, like we have to pay like $1,600, $1,700, which is going to be not fair as in my view, I think. So as right now, like I'm just like asking you, is there is any possible for that to give like any cap like for the rent also, and please give like 30% affordable houses like for the people like who are like living in my area, and 20% demand like we are asking like for 100 units like for the developments for minimum of if there is like any 100 units, like we have to give like at least 20% for the permanent affordable housing accessible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you for joining us today. Great. And so now we're going to proceed to have a presentation by staff and then followed by questions of staff.
Good morning. My name is Deanna Chorney, and I'm a project manager with our City Planning Division. I'm joined with Christine Ono, who's our lead on our consultation and engagement plan on inclusionary zoning, as well as Mark Conway and Matthew Bennett from Enbury Lyons Consulting. So I won't repeat some of what you already heard today, but certainly I just want to walk you through some of the work that we've already completed to date and our proposed policy directions and highlights of our engagement program. The first important piece to note is that certainly these policy directions are a first step in terms of a longer consultation and analysis process. The policy directions will continue to be refined as part of our consultations with both the public and stakeholders, as well as through further analysis, and will respond should there be any legislative changes that could impact our analysis. So as we know, inclusionary zoning is a land use planning tool that enables municipalities to require affordable housing in new developments. This authority is provided for under the Planning Act and Ontario Regulation 23218. We know that over 800 jurisdictions across North America and some in the UK and Australia use a form of inclusionary zoning. However, we also recognize it's just one policy tool to address housing affordability in our city. It's certainly not a panacea that can address all housing need, and typically relies on further funding and programs to address deeper housing need. So as I mentioned, the provincial regulation on inclusionary zoning was enacted in April of 2018. Since that time, we have been hard at work developing our housing need and demand analysis and a financial impact assessment. And we've also begun stakeholder discussions to get feedback on some of our initial policy directions and analysis. We are planning to begin public consultations on the proposed policy directions this June and throughout the summer and early fall, with the goal of coming back to committee in Q4 of this year on the results of the consultations. It's important to flag here, we've shown that the inclusionary zoning policy requires ministerial approval, and that can take up to 10 months. During this time, staff would be advancing implementation matters such as zoning bylaws or detailed plans for tenant access in coordination with other city divisions, and we'll also be ensuring that any policy is aligned with our Housing TO action plan, which is targeted in Q4 this year. So as I mentioned, the provincial regulation requires us to conduct a municipal assessment report looking at both housing need and demand and financial impact analysis. And as I mentioned, and it has been discussed, we retained Enbury Alliance to conduct the financial impact analysis, and we conducted the housing need and demand analysis in-house. A few key items to keep in mind for both these pieces of work. The first on the housing need and demand is that we looked at census data from 2006 to 2016 and market prices and rents from 2013 to 2018. The financial impact analysis utilized a residual land value analysis to assess the impact of proposed inclusionary zoning policies on land values. And one key assumption was that the affordable housing requirement can be absorbed in many stronger market areas in the city without negatively impacting land values and negatively impacting the supply of market housing overall, but in other areas of the city that wasn't true. And as I mentioned, we anticipate that these documents would continue to be refined as part of our consultation process or where a new analysis is warranted due to changes in terms of provincial legislation. And finally, we'll be bringing forward these final documents. Right now, they are proposed as part of our consultation process. We'll be bringing forward these final documents as part of any final recommended inclusionary zoning policy. So I think most of these stats have already been discussed today and won't come as a surprise to many of you, but certainly I wanted to flag a few key indicators related to housing affordability, and particularly that we know renter households in the city are disproportionately impacted by many of these affordability indicators. So we know that renter household incomes are about half that of owners, and of the city's 47% of renters, almost 1/4 are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. We have seen a larger increase in renters in the city compared to renter growth compared to owners, and particularly in the 20 to 34-year-old range and the 50 to 69-year-old range. And then has already been discussed, we could be doing much better in terms of the amount of affordable housing that has been built or approved in the last 5 years. Only 2% has been met the official plan definition of affordable, which is at or below average market rent. Just to unpack the incomes a little bit more, right now, average market rents in the city address about the 45th to 60th percentiles of incomes for renter households specifically. So when you look at some of the key workers in the city, this generally would include administrative assistants, garbage truck drivers, retail managers, and tradespeople. And layering on top of that, we know that asking rents are about 40% higher than average market rents, making affordability even further constrained for many of these key workers. So I won't go through all of the different policy directions, as many of them have already been discussed today, but I did want to just flag that we've generally grouped our policy directions through a number of different key themes. The first is that inclusionary zoning would apply to both strong and moderate market areas of the city. And that was using a whole slew of market data as well as financial viability analysis and our pipeline to assess what markets this would apply to. We are proposing a scale of development of about over 100 units or 140 units outside the downtown. And we have suggested a range of options in terms of the number of affordable units we would be securing. So again, these are proposed policy directions. We want to continue to discuss them, understand some of the needs, and balance a number of these approaches. So at this stage, we'll be consulting broadly on all of these directions. In addition, we've also identified a 25-year affordability period, and that our affordable rents would be based on 100% of average market rent or our updated affordable ownership definition. In addition, 10% of the units would be provided at 80% of average market rent. And as mentioned, we have calibrated the policy so that municipal incentives, particularly around revenue, are not required in order to have a successful policy. So as has been discussed, the hatched areas here are where we've identified stronger market areas. In addition, we've identified moderate market areas for Etobicoke, Young Eglinton, and Scarborough Centre, which would have potentially a lower inclusionary zoning requirement. Finally, in terms of our consultation strategy, you can visit our website at toronto.ca inclusionary zoning or tweet through hashtag inclusionary zoning TO. We will be doing a broad consultation program starting with public open houses this June and continuing on with stakeholder meetings, an online survey, and workshops and speakers events. And really this is intended to ensure that we get a range of voices through the consultation program, including renters and young households or households who have recently moved to the city and have to be looking for housing. And we anticipate that, as I mentioned, we will be bringing back the results of this consultation in Q4. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't going to go to this just now, but the last slide is really just to unpack a little bit on Bill 108. So right now, as proposed, and certainly this could change, the Bill 108 limits inclusionary zoning to protected major transit station areas. So there's up to 165 major transit station areas across the city, or community planning permit systems, which are ordered by the minister.
Questions of staff. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much for the presentation and all the work that you've been doing on this very complex file. As we've heard, inclusionary zoning is this fine balancing act. That's you have to set the requirement high enough to build the housing and the affordable housing that we need, but also trying to make sure that it's not so high where projects won't actually take place. And I know that's what you've been trying to strike a balance on. Could you help us understand why the assessment report analysis looks at the feasibility impacts of a fixed percentage rather than looking at the maximum amount of affordable housing that could actually take place or be achieved on these sites? So why a percentage versus like, let's bring X amount of units?
I think, Councillor, to answer your question, the principle is really to find that balance. And so starting the analysis, we had to pick a target and work from there. And so you see in the report, we start with 20% on the uplift in density, and then working with staff, we've calibrated sensitivity analysis to push and pull on those numbers to see where an IZ approach would continue to be viable.
Okay. How do we know how much of a land value reduction a project can tolerate in your model?
The way the analysis is calibrated is we first establish the land value of an underutilized site. And so our assumption is that a land vendor, whoever owns that property now prior to redevelopment, would have to at least make 10% more than the value of their site as it's currently operated. It could be a retail use or something like that. And so that's really the threshold, is how far could you push, in economic terms, how far could you push land value down until other uses become competitive economically? And that's really the breaking point of the model. In practice, pushing land values 40, 50, 60% in a negative direction will have significant pushback, but from an economic analysis perspective, that's really the breaking point, is when other uses become competitive in the market.
Okay. I want to talk about some of the as-of-right zoning piece and how we landed on that. So this is a key issue. and whether or not inclusionary zoning should really be applied to the density increase or actually include the as-of-right density as well. If we're moving forward to a City of Toronto that has a updated zoning bylaw across the city, if we could do that, that would be really important. So could we talk about at a high level why we started by only looking at applying IZ to density increases and not actually the as-of-right zoning?
So through the chair, our initial policy principles and goals for any approach was to ensure it's equitable and fair in terms of how we approach development all across the city. So we initially tested an inclusionary zoning requirement on the increase to the as-of-right development in order to address some of those inconsistencies in terms of where someone has previously owned land, perhaps for a longer period of time or more recently bought it. Through our consultation process, we've heard that perhaps a more equitable approach might be to apply it to an entire project, and that's one of the key pieces that we'll be consulting on is both of those options.
Okay. I want to go to page 13 of the report. Just look for some clarification here. We have two options there on the proposed policy direction, section 5. There's a note that says, like, option 1 is using percentages based on the proposed density increase, as we just discussed. Option 2 is using the entire project. There's a note there that says it's a percentage that achieves the same intent as option 1, and I just wanted to clarify what that means. Are we talking about it's a percentage that generates the same amount of affordable housing, or is the intent to actually capture affordable units for as-of-right development too?
So through the chair, the option 2 would apply to an entire project. And here we're suggesting that it would be the same number of affordable units that could have been achieved in option 1. NBLC has done some further sensitivity analysis on that. We may need to do further work to truly understand those impacts, as our initial testing was based on the increase to the as-of-right.
Okay. Then just probably time for one more question. Attachment 3, and you had it in your presentation. This is the map of the areas where we see strong market areas, moderate market areas. When I look at the map, I see the western portions of Crosstown. I see portions of where the relief line will be, much of the Shepherd corridor. They are not captured under the inclusionary zoning framework. And I guess that we need to consider transitions for inclusionary zoning and how that anticipates growth over time when we put this forward. So what in the framework ensures that we'll actually be securing affordable housing as part of future growth in areas that we're not necessarily seeing on this map today, but likely could have strong growth in the future?
So through the chair, one of the key aspects of the provincial regulation is a requirement to review any inclusionary zoning policy every 5 years. And that will take into consideration market impacts and market changes. And certainly we could review more frequently should there be significant public investments or other changes. So the intent here is that we looked at a whole different array of market indicators, including the work by NBLC, to understand which markets in theory could bear that inclusionary zoning requirement, and we would continue to review that over time.
Okay. I think I'm out of time, probably, but thanks very much.
Our chair is excusing herself till 12:30. We'll hear the questions, and then we'll come back after lunch and have the discussion or more questions. So, Councillor Wong-Tam, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I'm curious to know, with respect to the examples that you draw from other jurisdictions in particular, the length of term of affordability generally seems to be much longer than 25 years. It starts from 30 to possibly 99 years, and then 50 and 60 years, and in perpetuity. What we don't have is anything that sits at the 25 level. Why did you not propose that we go out to consultation with a longer affordability term?
Through the chair, as has been mentioned today, the affordability period for a number of other inclusionary zoning programs across North America has typically started at a lower length of time and has incrementally moved to a longer period. We have proposed for consultation a 25-year affordability period, which is generally consistent with the city's open door program. Again, to recognize that inclusionary zoning as a policy tool without additional financial or other incentives, it struggles to kind of have that longer affordability or perpetual affordability.
Okay. And with respect with those other jurisdictions, as you noted, they oftentimes provide additional measures and incentives to extend the affordability and perhaps even make the definition of affordability much more robust. Why did you take the initiative to eliminate any municipal initiatives as we go out for consultation? So why did you make that decision right here?
Through the chair, in terms of development of our initial proposed policy direction, one of the key goals was to ensure a sustainable policy that wouldn't rely on city revenue on an ongoing basis so that it could be implemented sustainably over time, and that was one key principle that we incorporated.
But if we don't have incentives, which we've learned from other cities that are pretty much needed, incentives and additional measurements to provide greater affordability in terms of term, as well as sort of defining broadening the definition of affordability. We've already learned from those other jurisdictions that it's not going to work as well as you'd like. You're going to have to revisit once again. Why have we not picked up that lesson and from where they've left off and then take it further?
Through the chair, as part of our consultation, we will absolutely be demonstrating that by layering on additional financial incentives or other tools, we could achieve some of that longer affordability or deeper affordability. And I think that's part of the consultation and dialogue we want to have.
But that's not my understanding, because you're saying that you're going to go out and consult on the scope that you've given yourself. You want this committee to endorse your scope. And that scope does not include municipal incentives. The scope does not include an affordability period that's longer than 25 years. Are you saying that what's contained in your report is not quite what you're going out to consult with, or that you'll be expanding it? And if so, then why do we not see it today?
Through the chair, perhaps I can elaborate. Our intention was to see if we could have a policy framework that was supportable in the absence of incentives. Part of our ongoing internal dialogue with our corporate partners, the AHO, corporate finance, will be to look at incentives. That's a leap, because there's no guarantee about those incentives, so we want it to get out the door, commence consultation, and part of the consultation, we're going to hear about the need for incentives. That'll help both inform what we come back to council with, committee and council, and also our final report.
I see. So you anticipate that the consultation will already give you back some feedback that without incentives and measures, it won't work. The affordability term, as we've heard from every deputant today, is the period is too short. And the definition of affordable housing, whether it's rental or ownership, the benchmark is too high. So you already anticipate that might be the feedback. Is that correct?
What I'm anticipating is we wanted to present a policy framework that could stand on its own in the absence of financial incentives, knowing that we've been hearing from people, longer affordability, more units, broader area-based, but only in order to achieve that, we need incentives.
Understood. Okay, thank you. And then finally, because the City of Toronto, City Council has adopted using a rights-based approach to housing, which means that we actually have to rethink how we devise policy, how the framework of service and program outcomes must incorporate all that new thinking. Does your report, in your opinion, have a rights-based approach? And if so, how would you demonstrate that you've incorporated that?
I believe that was a direction to staff to look at that, and that'll be part and parcel of the consideration through the HOT plan, of which city planning is contributing.
So inclusionary zoning as one tool out of the many tools within a toolkit to increase the widest, broadest range of housing, including deeply affordable, low income, moderate, and so forth. is that not one of the many components out of the HOT plan?
Inclusionary zoning is one of the many tools that will be applied to achieve broad affordability.
So my final question, and I'm going to try to keep it short, is that it will, yes, so is that you'll take the rights-based approach to housing under the HOT plan, but only under that umbrella of the HOT plan, so not individual instruments such as IZ.
No, I would say that whenever we're doing any form of policy work, we have a broad-based approach and look at equity. We may not use the words that you're using, Councillor, but we certainly will be looking at it from that perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Perks, please.
Thank you. I want to understand the research modeling exercise. So if I've followed it correctly and did some research work on land sensitivities, so you had that for citywide, then you tested a couple of points, 20%, 10%, and so on, to see what parts of the city would pop up. Is that fair? Yeah? Can I ask, could we do it the other way, which is to pick certain areas of the city where land value shows that there's some room, and then just run the numbers until it stops? Could do that, couldn't you? So we wouldn't necessarily have to stop at the 20% mark. We could just keep testing until you got the red flag.
Chair, that's correct, and our analysis does do that to an extent. There are a few pieces of sensitivity analysis in the model. We don't just stop at the 20%. We push beyond that, as well as testing longer affordability periods or deeper levels of affordability to gauge the impact of those analyses as well.
So it would be possible, following on the consultation process, if we hear we want, excuse me, we want to test for a certain design, a long term of affordability, and so, you know, at certain points in the market, pick some areas, maybe say around major transit stations, and then just run the number to see what percentage you could get with that framework. That would be a possible way to do it as we go forward in the consultation. Okay, thank you.
Was that your only question? That's all you needed to know. All right. Well, Councillor Bailao had wanted to ask some questions, and we will have some conversation hereafter and move some motions. So I think we'll just take an early recess at 12:25 and be back here at 1:30. Thank you, everybody who... What's that? Lunch extra 5 minutes? Those of you, thank you, staff. Those of you who are coming back, if we'll see you then, and if you're leaving, thank you very much for your participation here this morning on this item.